You know that jar of honey sitting in your pantry right now? The one you paid $12 or $15 for at Woolies or Kohl's? There's a very real chance it's not actually honey. Not in the way you think, anyway. And what makes this particularly unsettling is that you've probably been buying the same brand for years, trusting that golden jar, believing you were making a healthier choice for your family. But here's what I discovered when I started reading labels in the honey aisle. And I need to tell you about this because what the industry doesn't want you to know could change how you shop forever. I'm not a food scientist. I'm just an Australian who got curious one afternoon while shopping for breakfast supplies. I picked up my usual jar of honey, the one with the cheerful yellow label and the picture of bees on the front, and I actually read the fine print for the first time. What I found sent me down a rabbit hole that ended with me standing in the supermarket aisle for nearly 40 minutes, examining every single honey jar on the shelf. Other shoppers probably thought I was mad, standing there with my phone torch shining on label after label, squinting at text that seemed deliberately designed to be difficult to read. The patterns I discovered weren't just concerning, they were systematic, calculated, almost like the entire industry had agreed on exactly how much information to hide and how to hide it. Let me paint you a picture of what most of us do. We walk into Woolworths or Kohl's, we head to the honey section, and we make our choice based on what looks natural, what seems Australian, what has the right words on the label. Pure honey, natural honey, Australian honey. We assume these words mean something. We assume there are regulations protecting us. We pay a premium price, and we feel good about our choice. But what if I told you that the honey industry has a dirty secret that's hiding in plain sight, right there on those labels we barely read? Here's where things get interesting. Australia actually produces some of the finest honey in the world. Our native flora, our eucalyptus forests, our unique environment creates honey that's genuinely exceptional. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. The honey sitting on Australian supermarket shelves often isn't Australian at all. And sometimes, it's not even entirely honey. I started my investigation the same way you probably would. I looked at the front labels. Beautiful imagery, promises of purity, words like natural and organic scattered everywhere. But then, turned the jars around. And that's when the story changed completely. Because, on the back, in text so small you almost need reading glasses, even if you don't normally wear them, there's a section that tells you where the honey actually comes from. And what I discovered was that jar after jar, brand after brand, had the same curious phrase, a blend of honey from Australia and imported sources. Now, let me ask you something. If you were blending the world's finest honey with imported honey, what would that imported honey be? Where would it come from? And more importantly, why would you blend it at all? Because here's the thing about honey. Pure, high-quality honey doesn't need to be blended with anything. It's perfect as it is. Bees have been making honey for millions of years without our help. They don't need us to improve their product by mixing it with honey from halfway around the world. So when you see that blending is happening, you need to ask yourself, what's really going on here? What problem is this blending solving? And whose problem is it? Because I can tell you right now, it's not solving any problem you have as a consumer. The answer takes us to something called honey laundering. Yes, that's a real term, and it's a massive global problem that's affecting what lands on our shelves. Certain countries produce honey in industrial quantities at prices so low that Australian producers simply can't compete. We're talking about honey that costs a fraction of what it takes to produce genuine Australian honey. But there's a catch. That cheap imported honey often doesn't meet Australian purity standards. It might contain added sugars. It might be ultra-filtered to remove all traces of pollen, making it impossible to verify its origin. It might have been heated to extreme temperatures that destroy all the beneficial enzymes and nutrients that make honey valuable in the first place. Sometimes it's been diluted with corn syrup or rice syrup. Sometimes it contains antibiotics that would never be approved for use in Australian apiaries. The methods vary, but the goal is always the same. Produce something that looks like honey, tastes vaguely like honey, and can be sold as honey at the absolute lowest possible cost. So what does the industry do? They blend it. They take a small amount of genuine Australian honey and mix it with larger quantities of this cheap imported product. Suddenly, they can legally call it a blend and sell it on Australian shelves. The front label shows you bees and flowers and golden sunshine. The tiny text on the back tells you the real story, if you know how to read it. I found 7 distinct patterns across multiple honey brands in both major supermarkets that raised serious red flags. 7 ways that honey products manage to look like premium Australian honey while being something quite different. And once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it. Pattern number 1. The phrase may contain in the country of origin section. You'll see labels that say the honey may contain honey from Australia, China, Argentina, Brazil, and sometimes 4 or 5 other countries. May contain. Think about that word choice for a moment. It means they don't even commit to which countries the honey actually comes from. The blend could change from batch to batch, season to season, depending entirely on which source is cheapest at that moment. You're getting a mystery blend, and the only consistent thing is that it's probably mostly the cheapest option available. Pattern number 2. The extremely specific percentage game. Some brands will proudly declare on the front label that their product contains at least 20% Australian honey. 20%. That means 80% is coming from somewhere else. But because there's that Australian honey in there, the packaging can show Australian imagery, Australian bees, Australian flowers. The front screams Australian while the back whispers that 4/5 of what you're buying is imported. And here's the really clever bit. By stating at least 20%, they're not even committing to exactly how much Australian honey is in there. It could be 20%. It could be 21%. The point is, it's the bare minimum they can include and still claim an Australian connection. They've calculated precisely how little Australian honey they can use while still getting maximum marketing benefit from using the word Australian on the label. Pattern number 3. The absent purity certification. Genuine pure honey can be tested for purity. There are scientific methods to verify that honey hasn't been adulterated with corn syrup, rice syrup, or other sugar additives. Some Australian honey producers proudly display their purity certifications on their labels, but when you look at many of the blended honey products, those certifications are conspicuously absent. And when I looked into why, I discovered that many of these products would likely fail purity testing because they're not pure honey. Here's where the investigation took a turn that genuinely shocked me. I started researching what independent laboratory testing had found when analyzing honey sold in Australian supermarkets. Multiple investigations over the past few years have sent supermarket honey to labs for testing, and the results were staggering. A significant percentage of honey products failed purity tests, showing evidence of added sugars, ultrafiltration to hide origin, and other adulterations. We're not talking about a few dodgy brands. We're talking about products from major suppliers sitting on mainstream supermarket shelves. In some tests, nearly half of the products examined showed markers of adulteration. Half. That means if you randomly grabbed 2 jars of honey from a typical supermarket shelf, there's a real chance that one of them isn't actually pure honey. Think about that for a moment. Think about how many times you've bought honey without questioning it. Think about how many jars you've gone through over the years, feeding it to your family, using it as a natural remedy, paying premium prices for what you believed was a pure, natural product. Pattern number 4. The ultra-clear appearance. Real honey, especially raw or minimally processed honey, often has a slightly cloudy appearance. It might have tiny particles of pollen, bits of beeswax, or natural sediment. It might crystallize over time, becoming thick and opaque. These are signs of genuine, minimally processed honey. But many of the products I examined were crystal clear, almost like light corn syrup. That clarity comes from ultrafiltration, a process that heats the honey and forces it through extremely fine filters. This removes all pollen, all natural particles, and conveniently makes it impossible to determine the honey's actual origin through pollen analysis. It also destroys many of the beneficial enzymes and nutrients. You're left with a product that's technically honey-based, but has been stripped of much of what makes honey valuable. Pattern number 5. The suspiciously low price point. Quality Australian honey costs money to produce. Beekeepers invest in hive maintenance, transport, extraction equipment, and most importantly, they work within Australian environmental and safety standards. When you see honey priced at $7 or $8 for a large jar, something isn't adding up. Real Australian honey typically costs significantly more. That bargain price tag usually means you're primarily buying imported honey from countries with much lower production costs and fewer regulations. Pattern number 6. The vague language around processing. Some labels proudly state the honey is raw or minimally processed. Others say nothing at all about processing methods. That silence is telling, because when honey has been ultra-filtered, blended, heated, or otherwise heavily processed, manufacturers don't want to draw attention to it. The absence of information about processing is often a red flag that significant processing has occurred. Pattern number 7. The country of origin shuffle. I noticed something fascinating. Some brands would have different country of origin statements in different size jars. The small jar might say, product of Australia, but the large, economical, family-size jar of the exact same brand would say blend of Australian and imported honey. Why? Because they're producing different formulations for different price points, using more imported honey in the products where price-conscious shoppers are looking for value. They're betting you won't notice the difference. Now here's what really matters. Why should you care if your honey is blended with imported honey or if it's been ultra-filtered? Beyond the obvious issue of not getting what you paid for, there are genuine health and safety considerations. Honey is valued for its natural antibacterial properties, its enzymes, its antioxidants, and its complex nutrition profile. Raw honey contains beneficial compounds like propolis, bee pollen, and various enzymes that support digestive health and immune function. When honey is ultra-filtered and heavily processed, many of these beneficial properties are destroyed. The high heat processing breaks down the delicate enzymes. The filtration removes the pollen and propolis. What you're left with is essentially expensive sugar syrup with a honey flavor. It still tastes sweet. It still looks golden. But nutritionally, it's been stripped of most of what made honey valuable in the first place. You might as well be buying golden syrup for all the health benefits you're getting. But there's more. Some of the imported honey that ends up in these blends has been linked to contamination issues. Antibiotics that are banned in Australian honey production have been found in imported honey. Heavy metals, pesticide residues, illegal additives. When you buy a blend from unknown sources, you're accepting unknown risks. And the worst part is that the blending makes it nearly impossible to trace problems back to their source. If contaminated honey from one country is mixed with honey from 4 other countries, how do you identify where the problem originated? Think about this in practical terms. You're putting this honey in your tea every morning. You're drizzling it on your children's toast. You're using it when your family has a cough or cold because you believe in honey's natural healing properties. You're mixing it into yogurt, spreading it on crumpets, using it in baking, adding it to marinades. It's become part of your daily routine, part of how you care for your family's health. You're paying premium prices because you want to make a healthier choice. You're choosing honey over refined sugar specifically because you believe it's better for you, more natural, less processed. But what you're actually getting might be far removed from the natural beneficial product you think you're buying. That jar that cost you $14 might contain honey that's been heated, filtered, blended with corn syrup, and shipped halfway around the world. The gap between what you think you're buying and what you're actually getting is enormous. The Australian honey industry has been raising alarms about this for years. Local beekeepers, the people who actually tend the hives and harvest genuine Australian honey, have been watching their businesses struggle while supermarket shelves fill with cheap imported blends. They've been calling for better labeling laws, stricter testing requirements, and clearer country of origin rules. But change happens slowly, and in the meantime, these products continue to dominate shelf space. Here's what makes this particularly insidious. The products I'm talking about aren't hiding in some dodgy corner shop. They're in Woolworths. They're in Coles. They're positioned right next to genuinely pure Australian honey, often at eye level, often with the most attractive packaging. The average shopper has no idea they need to be detective-level careful when choosing honey. We assume that if it's in a major supermarket, if it has nice packaging, if it says natural on the label, then it must be legitimate. But that assumption is exactly what these products rely on. So what changed for me after this investigation? Everything. I now spend time in the honey aisle actually reading labels. I look for products that explicitly state 100% Australian honey. I check for purity certifications. I look for brands that clearly identify their processing methods. I'm willing to pay more for the real thing because I now understand that the cheap option isn't actually honey in any meaningful sense. It's a honey-based product, heavily processed, of questionable origin, with unknown health benefits. And here's what I want you to understand. This isn't about creating fear or panic. This is about making informed choices. The information is there on the labels if you know what to look for. The blended products aren't necessarily dangerous, but they're definitely not what most people think they're buying. And when you're paying premium prices for what you believe is pure, natural Australian honey, you deserve to get exactly that. The honey industry in Australia is at a crossroads. Local beekeepers are struggling to compete with products that undercut them on price by blending with cheap imports. Consumers are unknowingly buying honey that doesn't meet the standards they expect, and the regulatory framework hasn't quite caught up with the sophisticated ways that honey products are marketed and blended. Something needs to change. Better labeling, mandatory purity testing, clearer country of origin requirements. Until those changes happen, the responsibility falls on us as consumers to educate ourselves and make careful choices. I started this investigation because I wanted to know if my honey was really honey. What I discovered was an entire industry of products designed to look like premium Australian honey while delivering something quite different. 7 distinct patterns that appear across multiple brands, all available in our major supermarkets, all sitting there waiting for unsuspecting shoppers who trust that what they see is what they get. The next time you're in the honey aisle, I want you to pick up that jar you usually buy. Turn it around. Read the country of origin section carefully. Look for purity certifications. Check whether it's 100% Australian or a blend. Notice the price and ask yourself if it seems too good to be true. Because in the honey industry, if the price seems too good to be true, it probably is. You're not getting a bargain. You're getting exactly what you paid for, which is significantly less than you thought. Your honey matters. What you put in your body matters. What you feed your family matters, and you deserve to know exactly what you're buying. The information is there, hidden in tiny text and careful word choices, but it's there. You just need to know how to read between the lines. And now you do.